podcast where we watch the newest TV shows and attempt to answer over the course of the episode whether or not you should add them to your queue. This month, we're breaking out our defibrillators, keeping those Instagram DMs open, and making sure we're wearing the right color pinnies as we discuss the 2022 Netflix adaptation of Alice Oseman's hit webcomic, Heartstopper. I'm Allen, and I'm joined by the one chaotic straight friend in a friend group that's getting gayer by the minute. It's Magellan.
Hey, that's me, just reading a book in the corner or trying to control people's lives. I'm one of those guys. I don't know.
Who could say, I guess there is more than one technically straight person in the Heartstopper friend group. Huh. That's
yeah, I mean, it's all a spectrum. Who's straight, really?
I'm trying to think of anybody straight in this comic. Only the bullies. Bad people.
I mean, I just mean in life. Like,
no one.
I don't think anyone's straight, really.
Not anymore. Not after the event. After everything that happened, man. Sheesh.
When you said pennies, I thought that was like some sort of British slang, and then I realized that's like a thing that we call the Jersey things.
Can I tell you what happened today? After dinner,
Yeah.
I wrote this intro, and I stopped. I had to sit on my bed and think really hard about what to call those.
Called? Yeah.
No, because I knew they were called pennies, but I was like, they call them something else in the show. Do they call them vests? Because then if I say vest, is Magellan going to be like, they're not vests? So what do I call them?
Yeah, what did they call them in the show?
I don't remember, and I wasn't able to find the scene from the sports day.
Switch thingies with me. I can't remember what it was.
Pennies, the thing that you wear when you play sports at school. They're colored. That's what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Magellan, first of all. It's a new month. We're here in July of 2022.
Yeah.
A post-Pride Month haze. I'm feeling particularly jubilant because I am thrilled to talk about this new show with you.
Yeah, me too.
Should you watch? If you're new, by the way, hello. It's our show where we watch new shows and tell people if they should watch them, like I said up top. And we're talking Heartstopper. It's an adaptation of a webcomic, a webtoon, a British webtoon called Heartstopper, which is really fun to say. Magellan, first question, why is it called Heartstopper?
Probably because it's like, oh, like that's the feeling, like, oh.
The flutter, that moment when your heart stops.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar with the series in general, just an overview, it's about Charlie and Nick. Charlie and Nick are two young British teenagers going to an all-boys school called Truham. I think it's Truham Grammar School, if I'm not mistaken. And they sit next to each other in class, and they discover that they may or may not have feelings for each other. And it's about them, their friend group, and the trials and tribulations of being a young queer teen in the modern day. So naturally, we had to discuss it. I'm thrilled by the premise. I want to talk about what we came into the show, what our knowledge of the show was going in. And I'll speak to myself first. So I had heard about this show on a podcast that I really like called Gender Reveal. I've recommended the Gender Reveal podcast on chats before on our main chats feed. And in that, they do like a little recommendation segment, sort of like a chat sim, but it's more broad. And Tuck had spoken about Heartstopper and the idea of queer media that isn't about suffering, and how nice and refreshing it is to like have something where people don't die. People don't there's just such a massive number of stories featuring queer people where we are either killed or harmed or troubled or heartbroken or whatever. And he was saying how wonderful it is to see a story where none of those things happen. And how difficult it was to appreciate a story like that, because we really do, as people who enjoy media, seek out like not conflict, but just things, quote unquote, happening. And whether or not those things have to be good or bad is a question that I'm excited to talk about here. So hearing that, I had queued up the series for a while, and then we had a gap in July, and we said, well, we need to watch something. It is from just a few months ago, but it's still very much in the conversation. It got announced for a second season. The webcomic is on hiatus right now. It's funny, if you read the last chapter that was released of it, at the end, Alice Oseman is like, hey, I'm really, really burnt out doing this because also we have a Netflix show now, and I'm like very heavily involved in that. Weird how she's like 25, I think. And doing a TV show and a webcomic, she's like, for some reason, I can't do both of these things. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to just work on the show and try to like live my life for a bit. So I totally get that. And in doing that, I also read a bit of the webcomic, but we can talk about that as we go into this. because I read the first 2 volumes, which is what this season covers. What about you, Magellan?
I didn't know anything about the show coming into it just from what you told me. So I was excited to watch it. And I thought it was good. And I think we should talk about it.
Absolutely. We were in a like queer leftist bookstore in New York when I bought the first volume, and I distinctly remember the cashier when I told her about it.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
The cashier was like, I'm like, should I read this first or should I watch the rest? And she was like, very serious. She was like very quiet, but otherwise, and then she went very serious, and she was like, you should read it first. I was like, oh, okay, if you say so. And so I read it. I looked up like how much does the first season of the show cover, and it's the first 2 volumes. So I read the physical first one, and then I read the second one online. And I went into it like knowing, okay, this is a low conflict story about teen romance, super straightforward. And to just speak to the comic for a moment, I really like the sort of light, sketchy art style of the comic. I think that comes across in the series a little bit. How you see a lot of the graphical effects in the show.
Like flittering on screen and off screen, yeah.
Precisely. And it's very funny. It reads like, and this is not in any way an insult, but it reads like a webcomic in that all of the jokes are like super snappy and like little bits and, they don't necessarily read like they're being said out loud. They read like you're going to see these all screenshotted and put on Twitter or something.
Yeah, very like on the surface references to things and like an earnestness in everything that is said that you can only really get when it's like one person's labor of love, which is such like an infectious thing to feel about something.
Yeah, and it's very like it's so light. It's the breeziest thing in the world. I read the whole first volume in like 45 minutes, and then I read the second volume the next morning as soon as I woke up, and I was like, okay, cool. My question though, having just read the webcomic first, was, okay, how do you turn this into 8 episodes of Netflix show? Like, things happen, and there is conflict in the comic, but like everything just works out. And so going into the show, I was constantly running in this thought in my head of like, can you have a show without any conflict? Can you have a show with no villain and no like motivating drive? And so that's something we're going to be talking about with the show. But the last thing I want to say about the comic was, so the last chapter of volume 2 is the notorious The Beach Trip, which also is in the series, depicted in the series, just to not give any specifics there. And in The Beach Trip in the comic, the 2 of them hold up like an iPhone and they listen together to Mac DeMarco on Spotify. And the reason I bring that up is I'm like, that's so cool. They've never referenced real music in this comic so far. And I'm so curious how you would adapt this and how you would make music a central character, because these are teenagers who listen to a lot of music. And so that was my first thing of like, maybe the show is going to like have a lot of music. So going into it, that was my like big question mark, is how are they going to incorporate music and sound in are adapting from a visual medium.
You told me coming into this that there were differences in the tone between the comic and the show that were for better and for worse. I'm curious about how you were thinking about that as you were watching the show, or does that give too much away?
I think that gives a bit of. I'll have to flesh that out a bit in the back half of our discussion. Okay. But just to be broad, one of the things that the show does to differentiate itself is it inserts conflict where there wasn't any.
Sure, right.
Or where there wasn't any that felt serious, and it makes it a lot more grim and not grim, but like definitely serious and sad. Honestly, I had the pleasure of watching this with a really good friend. Both of us are queer, and both of us were very much like invested in these characters' plights and being like, okay, there are moments in this where I have to stop and like think about it because I don't feel comfortable just like slamming play, like give me more serotonin like I did for parts of the show. But we can talk about that. So that's my main thing, is like, in a way the show decided, okay, we have to make 8 episodes and we have to like pull people in the Netflix way. What better way to do that than to just add conflict? So I have mixed feelings about that.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Do you want to talk about the pilot?
Let's do that. Let's talk about episode 1.
Fabulous.
So over the course of this episode, this is listed in the timestamps, or what am I saying? Throughout this episode of Should You Watch, we will be covering, with spoilers, different parts of this season of Heartstopper. The timestamps for the discussion are in the show notes, so you can reference that there. But we're going to start talking about the pilot, so we will be spoiling that first episode. And in each section, we'll tell you our thoughts on should you watch this show, given what we've told you so far.
Yes. And so going into episode 1, I'm immediately questioning, how do they cast these people? How do they make them look? How do they costume them? And what are they going to do about the music? And right from the gate, I was like, that's Charlie. You know, we just we see Joe Locke and we're like, that kid right there. I don't know why this feels right, but that's Charlie.
Yeah, that casting was great. I read a couple of the comics that you sent me, and I agree that he very much has the Charlie vibe.
And the ensemble is so big for what makes the show work, and like the casting choices. There's a lot of good YouTube videos of the cast and Osman herself like hanging out, learning how to draw with each other, playing like funny games online, because like the marketing team knew that's what people are coming for. Is like, let's watch these kids hang out. And what was funny about that was there's a part where they're like Alice is going to teach people how to draw Nick and Charlie, and she was like, yeah, for Charlie he's like the hardest character for me to draw because his hair is just like a bunch of swirls. He's like a very, very curly haired boy, cartoonishly so in the comic. So in the show they just had a kid who's like, you know, very young, fresh faced, and has curly hair. And then another casting thing that I got right away out of the pilot was so I was actually confused reading the comic about the difference between Nick Nelson, the other main character, and Benjamin and Ben, because in the comic they look pretty similar. The interesting thing I learned about Heartstopper was it was at a weird time, a sort of like transitional time for Osman's art style. Because fun fact I wanted to reveal to you on the podcast. Did you know that Heartstopper is a spinoff?
Oh, really? Of what?
The main comic that she does is about Charlie's sister.
Oh, okay.
You think about like,
that's awesome.
Isn't it?
That's cool. I want to read that.
Yeah,
Charlie's
totally
sister is like one of the best characters in the show.
Spoiler alert, she's my favorite side character in the show. Yeah. So the
What's
comic,
that called?
I just had it up. It's called Solitaire. The Solitaire by Alice Oseman was the original, and she had these two, like, you know, the main character is like gay younger brother and his boyfriend, and she was like, what if I made a whole thing about that? And it's wildly more popular now, but it's like a whole universe. Like a bunch of these characters have their own comics. So I've been like curious about exploring all of that stuff too in reading Heartstopper.
That's
and
cool.
seeing where the conflict comes in. But yeah, so in the book I got Nick and Ben mixed up a lot. And that was my first bit of like, holy crap, casting. Was the guy that got to play Ben, who is, for folks at home, Charlie's initial like fling that he's talking to at the beginning of the show. They make out in private, and this relationship seems like it may not be
controlling and demeaning to Charlie. Yeah,
he's terrible. I think the guy who plays him is amazing at being a piece of garbage. Like, I just hate him. Sebastian Croft is the actor's name. It's like, you just hate it. Like, I think what the comic does that's different though is they don't make him too detestable right away. You're just like, he's a little forward, okay, but just the way that Ben carries himself in the show, you're like, this guy seems bad, and the more you learn about him, you're like, this guy is bad. He's a horrible person. And it's that classic, you know, young early queer relationship where you're like, I will take what I can get. This person wants to be intimate with me and makes me feel important, except when we actually try to talk to each other, it seems like nothing's there.
Yeah, right.
And then we start getting a lot of like the sort of visual touches. Did you find all of the like graphical touches, the leaves? The leaves are a huge motif in the comic. Did you find all of that stuff like charming, or did it get in the way of like trying to just watch the series?
My initial impression of it was like, okay, that's kind of cute, I guess. Like, not having the context of it in the comic. Like, okay, that's cute. They're giving us this little visual cues. These cues when like characters like each other. That's useful. Yeah. It makes it clear to the audience. We're not wondering really at any point, like, does this person like this person? We're just sort of watching relationships unfold and watching characters figure each other out. So I think what it does is it emphasizes that there's like a little bit of magic in this world, just, or like, you know, romance. And it also emphasizes like there aren't secrets here. we're
Right.
showing you what's going on and what you need to know. But I don't know, I thought it was like a little like, okay, that's kind of cute. And then when I read bits of the comic, I had a greater appreciation for adaptation is like an interesting art form, or like kind of sub art form within film. When I was in college, I like took a creative writing class that was specifically about adapting fiction to film. And it's interesting to become acquainted with the source material and be able to see like, okay, how do you, especially when something comes from a graphic novel or like another visual medium where there are these distinct visual choices that you want to reflect in the show. So I developed an appreciation for like those artistic choices. I think I ended up liking the other kind of visual choices that were from the graphic novel format a little bit better, like the way that the texts showed up on the screen sometimes, or the panels that would happen, or like when Charlie's imagining a worst case scenario and suddenly there are all these like harsh crosshatch pencil lines around the world. That stuff I thought was pretty cool. And once I'd seen the comic, those little like leaves and things were a nice reminder to me of like, yeah, that did look really cool in the comic. And it's still kind of cool here, but it's like better knowing what it's trying to emulate, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
But I think overall visually the show's really cool.
I agree. Yeah, and I think it even lightens up on the comic panel stuff throughout the series, as if the pilot is like, hey, we really need to convince you that this is an adaptation of a comic, and then eventually they like I either stopped noticing it or it stopped happening as much. The comic panel transitions, but you do still get lots of like visual flourishes, and they use it really subtly later on.
Yeah, definitely.
You're saying?
Were you gonna say more about that? Sorry.
No, I just think that like when they use it, it really matters. And you mentioned magic, and it does almost feel like there is an element of magic to the series over time.
Yeah, I think the other thing to recognize the show for is the way that it embellishes visuals with like extra things that television and film can do, because the comic is in black and white, and this show makes excellent use of color throughout, and I think the lighting choices of the show are really striking, and the way that it uses like shallow depth of field, and it's just like a very, very pretty show to look at, and those are a set of choices that are like original to the show, that are carrying forward the tone of the comic without undermining it or clashing with it, which is a tricky thing to do in an adaptation. I think they handle it pretty well from what I've seen anyway.
Definitely. And it's a really hard thing to communicate all of that color and stuff in a television show, because it's not just like the coloring and the framing, but this is a well-directed show too. Even I'm just like thumbing through the pilot right now, and there's so many memorable like shots, even like Charlie and his sister sitting on the bus, and like the bright yellow barrier separating them from the rest of the kids is like clean visual storytelling without beating it over your head. It's just like, this is a thing that if you pause a frame and look at it, you're going to consider. Similar to how in the comic, every moment feels like you're going to screenshot this, crop it, and send it to your friends on Tumblr, because that's what it's for. That's part of the purpose of it.
Right.
But yeah, we we meet all these different characters. We also, of course, meet our deuteragonist Nick, who is just such a sweet, thank you. Thank you. I relearned that word recently. The comic is definitely, and both the comic and the show are about Charlie's
perspective. Yeah.
Yes. And I've heard things about where it goes later that make me interested in seeing more of that, because so far, if I have anything big to say about Charlie's characterization, it's that they're holding like a lot of his stress close to the chest. Like, they do not show the bullying he experienced before the events of the story.
Yeah, we talk a lot about it, but we don't see it.
Exactly. And he experiences bullying in the show, but not to the extent that like he was traumatized the way that he says he was, and that he actually was beforehand.
Right. Right.
And so he's a guy that's like holding on to a lot of like stress and worry about himself. He's one of the only out gay people in his entire school, which I imagine is extremely scary. Even like the show acknowledges that even like the process of coming out is not as simple as you do it and then you're done. It's kind of a gradual process. I think there's an episode later about another character that handles that even more elegantly. But it's not just something that you like have a big moment with your parents and then you tell everyone in school and it's fine. It's like, oh, some people still don't know. Some people don't talk to me anymore. Some people, come out to me because I came out. Like there's just so many different elements to that, even though it seems like something really simple.
Right.
But I really liked Nick, and I thought that the early stuff with Ben here like very much set him up as some sort of a villain. This is another thing where I was like, okay, the show is leaning harder into this. But it still has the like short, quick bits of comedy, like the pen explosion on Nick's hands, which is directly ripped from the comic. Most of the first episode is exactly from the comic, like word for word even. I like the part. This is one little line that they changed. I know I'm going to stop comparing it to the comic too much, but he gets the pen explode on his hand, and he's like, oh, I should get it as a tattoo. And the comic, Charlie goes like, you're not allowed to do that. That's against school code. You can't get tattoos. You can't get blue pen tattoos.
That's funny.
And then the last big thing that's a change is the new and improved emphasis on another relationship in the show, which is Elle and Tao. Tao is one of Charlie's best friends, and Elle is also one of Charlie's best friends who recently transitioned and moved to the girls' school nearby. And so we get the sort of like questioning queer perspective, the trans perspective. We get a lot of like different types of diversity in this friend group. But the comic like does not delve into Elle and Tao even like 10% as much as this does. And right away, even that first scene with the juice where he was like, I keep buying her juice even though she doesn't go to our school anymore, is like a really nice way to describe like what it's like when you feel like somebody has left your life but they're still the same person. Like I'm used to Elle coming here. I'm used to her being our friend at lunch, and I'm used to buying her juice, and none of like she's still our friend but she's not here physically anymore, and the difficulty of that, especially as a young person. And they actually got a trans actress, which I thought was very cool. They did the work. Like I said, they did the work where they needed to do it.
Right.
So those are the big like character moments in this one. Then we also, of course, get Charlie's sister, the icon herself, permanently holding a little beverage at all times and throwing shade at her brother. Loving shade, of course. And then just, the like Nick stuff starting to escalate. I made a comment. I think this happens in the first episode when Nick finds out that, Ben is like being terrible to Charlie, and he confronts him. Yeah, that happens in this episode. He doesn't hit him. And I think what's one of the really like nice subtle things about Heartstopper is it depicts like teen stress and angst in a way that doesn't promote violence towards each other. It's like conflict management in a like non-violent way pretty often. At least this early in the series.
Yeah, at first, definitely.
Yes. Which makes it a big deal as that changes. But for now, it's like, oh yeah, Nick just like tells this guy to go away because the stakes haven't escalated just yet. So I found this like really cute. I love the colors, like you said. I love Nick and Charlie right away. They're just cute. This is a very cute,
they're such sweet kids. You want the world for them. They clearly like each other a lot. It's from the very beginning. You're like, oh, okay, yeah,
you're gonna get it.
I want to watch this. Yeah.
And so that sweetness gets you through a lot. And I think what it sets up is it's not a question of are Nick and Charlie going to get together. You kind of, if you've seen stories like this before, that that's what's going to happen. It's a question of when and how and what happens along the way there. To them finding each other romantically. So I went into this pilot really enamored. I thought the music was great. So many good pop needle drops, indie needle drops. They clearly put a lot of good effort into all of those choices. Fantastic casting. I was sold from minute one, TBH. What about you?
No, agreed. Yeah. I think you'll know from the pilot if you want to watch the show. Like it's very clear the themes it's interested in, the tone it wants to set, the stylistic choices it's going to make. If you like the pilot, you'll like the show. If you don't, you won't. And I liked it, and I wanted to watch more of it.
I think to the how much conflict is there in this series question, the most conflict in this episode is that his boyfriend is an asshole. And if you're like, okay, that's kind of like the height of drama for a lot of this show. Just like be aware that the show's holding some more serious things close to the chest. And if you're like, okay, is that it? Is that like all the conflict? Like it does go from there. So that may be more of a sell or less of a sell depending on who you are. Just be aware of that.
Yeah, well, and I think it also maintains throughout the show the feeling that we get in a few scenes where we see Charlie and then Nick going to like draft their Instagram DM to each other and then delete it and then be like, oh, well, should I say it this way? And then delete it. And like, that's a sort of conflict too that stays throughout the show. So there is, like you're saying, a sort of escalation of like
physical conflict.
The physical conflict and like the heroes and villains of the story, I guess. But there is also that sort of like intimate, anxious, mundane, small kind of like, oh God, is he going to text back? Did I say something stupid? I'm going to send 5 texts in a row and see what he says. Kind of conflict too. Which in a way, it's delightful. I love that stuff.
It's delightful. It's relatable. And in a way, it's more realistic than it, like, obviously Euphoria or something like that heightens the drama to an extreme.
Right.
Because
exactly.
Even though some people might say like, oh, high school isn't this like bucolic and relaxing and fun. It's like, well, sometimes, the biggest stress that you have for the week is like, does he text me back? Or like, am I queer? Am I bi? What's going on? Like, those are the biggest stressors.
YouTube says. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think when you define conflict and you say like, is Heartstopper a show without conflict? It's like, it's a show without like well, no, that's not even true. I don't think any of that. You can't say it doesn't have conflict in any real way.
I think it's a show where like
things will work out.
You're confident that things will work out, and it has the rom-com pacing to an extent of like things are going great. Oh God, something went wrong. Now things are great again. But like in a more true to life way. Like it has the sort of contours of a romantic comedy type of thing. But yeah, at a pace and with situations that are just more realistic, which I think is refreshing. I think we should talk about episodes 2 through 6. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds fantastic.
So essentially across episodes 2 through 6, we see this budding romance between Charlie and Nick. Charlie's trying to gauge, does Nick like me? We're starting to hang out more and more. Is he gay? Is he queer? What is happening? And Nick is asking the same questions about himself, and trying to sort out what his sexuality is, what to do about his feelings for Charlie. And so they end up starting a relationship that at this point in the series, they're keeping secret as Nick sort of sorts this stuff out for himself, because he's captain of the rugby team. He has all these like, shitty, outwardly homophobic friends, and then friends who are like apathetic about the homophobia around them as well. So it's a hostile environment in which to be openly queer. And then, each episode there's like kind of a situation that we have to navigate as we start to date each other. Oh, this girl asked me out and I have to let her down easy. We're at a party and we're going to make out and, stuff like that. It's a very sweet chunk of the show. A lot of moments of like, oh, this is great. I love that.
It's a heart warmer, not only a heart stopper, but a heart warmer.
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. I think one of the things I found really heartwarming about this middle arc was one of the good additions of the show was to give Elle not only something to do but characters to do things with, because they introduced Tara and Darcy, who are the first two girls. She is not getting along well at her girls' school because she's really like anxious there as a trans woman and also just like a new student at the same time. How do I make friends? Her teacher literally tells her, I need you to make friends at some point. You can't go through high school alone. And so she just like coincidentally runs into Tara and Darcy. Tara is both of them are actually in the comic. I think I had you read the dance,
the
party
arc
scene
with the party. Yeah.
But it's less about like Tara and Darcy are these out and about lesbians who like talk and joke about their queerness and their friendship and all of that stuff. And it's more like it's played as not a punchline, but like a funny twist in the comic that like, oh, by the way, this girl that Nick liked when he was in elementary school is gay. This is like revealed in a different order in the comic. It's actually revealed at the party, I believe, at Harry's party. So, because he just goes up to her and he's like, hey, by the way, everyone thinks that we can still be together. Do you want to be together? I don't know if I'm straight anymore. And she's like, oh, I've been gay, dude. And that's the thing that they kind of like completely tweaked for the show, because that's a very funny panel in that you go like, haha, that's like great. What a good twist. That doesn't make sense if real people said it like that. Just like off the cuff, like, hey, by the way. So instead they make her and Darcy these like side characters who are invested in Elle's whole situation with Tao, which is the big
invested in that, and also there's like a really cool relationship between Tara and Nick as he's starting to navigate his sexuality, where he's like confiding in her first. I really liked how their relationship develops over these episodes, and it's like feels so essential to the show that it was surprising to me to read the comic with the party, and to see that like what I thought was one of the coolest pivotal moments was like not in the comic at all, which is the moment where
set the scene.
Nick has had that conversation with Tara, and then there's the dance floor, and there's the Church's song Clear as Blue, and it's building to the drop, and you're like, something's gonna happen. And then he looks over and he sees Tara and Darcy kissing on the dance floor. And it's just this moment of like, yeah, I could do that. That like, it can be okay.
It can be that easy.
Awesome. And I was like, fuck yeah, this is great. So it's kind of a surprise that wasn't in the comic, but a really welcome addition to the show. And I'm glad that those characters have so much airtime in the series. Yeah.
That party, which takes place in episode 3, is like the most pivotal set piece, I'd say, in the first 2 volumes of the comic. It's it's the first time that Nick and Charlie kiss, and so I was super curious how they portrayed it, because also they make Harry a character earlier on in the comic than they do in the show. He's less of a trash man in the comic. They like zoom once he becomes a character, he's just the worst person in the world. He talks like this. He sounds snobby, if that makes sense. I mean, I don't know much about the different types of British accents, but he just exudes jackassery. And he hosts a party his birthday party's in a hotel, which that he's one of those guys. His 16th birthday. But yeah, man, so Magellan knows this about me. Clear as Blue is one of my favorite songs. It's my favorite Church's song. It's one of the best drops in all of music. And I heard it playing, and I told the friend I was watching with, I was like, they started the song right towards the drop. Are they gonna they have to do something right at the drop, right? And you feel it barreling towards that. And then when the kiss is not Nick and Charlie, but it is instead Elle and Darcy, you're like, not Elle and Darcy.
Tara and Darcy.
Tara and Darcy. You're like, oh my God. I'm like, I want to cry. And then we cut back to Nick, and he's like emotional. You never see a show do that. You never see the pivotal kiss be of side characters, because and that's beautiful. The use of music here justifies the show's existence to me. It's just incredible. The lighting, this is what is called in some circles gay lighting. The use of neon here, gay or bisexual lighting, depending on who it is. It's just so heightened and so beautiful, and it's like and Magellan asked me, he said, I wish I had watched the show with you to hear your reactions. And this is a big moment where I was like, I got out of my seat and I like yelled into a pillow and I was like, fuck, come on, let's go. It's just it's euphoric, honestly. And sometimes, being a teenager is like that. Sometimes you just have a moment that feels like the biggest effing moment of your life. And I love that. Again, it's not them, but so similar to that, that musical moment where it feels like it's barreling towards a conclusion, Heartstopper just starts to accelerate the pace of Nick and Charlie's relationship. And again, I love that it's not barreling towards like, are they going to get together? But it's an inevitability, like a celestial inevitability that these two boys will fall in love and will be able to confess to each other eventually that what they're experiencing is love. I really love that a lot. I know I'm saying the word love a lot, but that's like one of the central concepts in the series. And through 3 to 6 is also or 2 to 6 is where we get a lot of like just people hanging out. I think that's like a big benefit of the show too, is it's good to just like sit back and watch, I don't know, like when Elle and Tao have a movie night and it's sitting on his bed on his laptop watching Arrival, and it's like that's somebody's movie night, man. That like he talks about like, I want you to come over and watch all these like bad movies that you're not gonna like because I'm in high school and the way I define my personality is that I watch a lot of movies. Like who hasn't been that person at some point? So there's just a lot of clever like, oh, that is how it be. And everybody messages each other. They really do a lot of good, like you were saying, with like the text messages and the overlays and people stressing about text and getting excited, like, oh, he texted me back. Or there's like good autocorrect humor in there, even briefly. Like it's just somebody did so much work making the texting feel active. They even used like actual Instagram DMs to convey that. So the like hanging out factor in 2 through 6 was like delightful to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think overall the way the show interacts with technology and the internet feels really truthful and not like a boomer wrote it, Right. Because there's a group text where some texts happen out of order and people have to catch up to each other. And there's moments where, like I said before, Nick is watching a YouTube video about bisexuality to like learn what it is.
That's in this batch of episodes, right? I think it is.
Yeah. I don't remember the exact one, but it's in here. When he Googles the moment, one of my favorite moments that I texted you about, he's watching Pirates of the Caribbean with his mom, and his mom's like, I know you always like this because of Keira Knightley. And then we get this perspective shot where he looks at Keira Knightley and then he looks at Orlando Bloom, and then it cuts to the computer where he's typing like, what is bisexuality or something like that, or like, am I bisexual? Which is like, something that a 11th grade kid would Google if they were like, what? And I think it was just cool to see the internet play such a major role and such an accurate role and a positive role in these kids' lives, and negative too. Like we also see, for example, when Tara posts a picture of her and Darcy kissing on Instagram, and then we see the couple of comments that she deletes because they're homophobic. And I think that's good too, because it shows us that like, it's not universally positive. There are benefits and drawbacks, but I think what the show makes clear is like the sense of self-knowledge and community that these characters feel with each other is made possible by technology that links them directly to each other and directly to sources of information. And I think that's so important to talk about when you're telling like a 21st century queer story, right? So I thought that was well done and really interesting and cool to see unfold over these episodes.
I just finished watching Miss Marvel, which wrapped up its first season, and that series uses TikTok a lot to be like, oh, she's a teenager, and so like a lot of plot development about like, what do people think of Miss Marvel happens via TikTok, which I do think is accurate, but is just portrayed in a much more ham-fisted way compared to this, because it's like every main character and side character in the show seems to make a TikTok where they just face the camera and say like, I think Miss Marvel is this. And it's like, yeah, that's not how TikTok necessarily works. A lot of it is, yeah, people just like talk at their camera and like go on a soapbox, but there's like so much more to it. And I think that this, it shows the full spectrum of like the internet is not just even Instagram DMs. It's text messages. It's like Google searches. It's YouTubers. And so that brings me to like something I do love Nick realizing his bisexuality in this, because he's very certain that he still likes girls, and he's just not able to like fully let go of his like masculinity with the rugby club. We get like some good rugby scenes in here also. I think episode 4 is the actual like big rugby game. Really great directing on that. But this is where I started thinking like, which is part of what they expect you to do with a teen romance. Which character do I relate to the most? I know you said you felt a little bit of kinship with Isaac as the like nice guy who just like supports people and reads books.
Yeah, I think probably I felt the most attachment to is it Tao or Teo?
It's Tao.
Tao. I think I probably felt the most attachment to Tao.
Oh, buddy, we'll talk.
If I'm not making a joke, like, and not in like a this is the best character, but in like a I can see your flaws, and I understand them.
Yeah, no, that's I really respect your honesty there, because Tao is a flawed character in a very really realistic way.
Yes. Yeah.
So I love that you can say that. I felt myself going back and forth between Charlie and Nick, honestly. Because I definitely have the like.
Why do you think that was?
Yeah, so I think I have in general the personality type of Charlie where I am like I'm constantly thinking about my presence in a group of people and like, am I taking up too much space? Am I annoying people? Am I weird? Am I like too gay, for example, with certain people? Like, and his relationship with his parents seems really good. I love his relationship with his dad and the implication that like his dad like supports him, but like doesn't have the words to talk about it exactly.
Yeah, that felt real to me.
Totally. And it's all in like moments where Charlie comes to the car and his dad is like, 10 o'clock. And like they goes to Harry's party in episode 3 and the dad's like 10 o'clock. And he's like, what about 11? And the dad's like 10 o'clock. Partly because he's a parent and partly because like this is a child who has been bullied so much that you're like worried when he leaves the house. So like you feel more protective of him. And but he's still there. He still like wants to talk to him. So I mostly felt like Charlie, but at the same time I had the questioning of my identity be very, very, very similar to Nick's. I did not have a like traditional like hair side part bisexual YouTuber guy be like, here's what bisexual is, and here's when I realized it was me. That was not my experience at all. I'm sure that's plenty of people, but I thought that was kind of goofy, honestly. For me though, it was just like that exact same thing, and like Googling like hot guy and also following the right people on Twitter, like just that exact thing, but for Twitter was how I started to connect those wires in my brain. Yeah. But the repeated sense of like, no, I have to be this. I can't be that. And I can't be with Charlie because girls like me. But this is not that girls liked me that much in school, but same idea of like, I think I like girls, but there must be a word for how I feel. And I love how that wraps around towards the end of the series, by the way, but we'll talk about that in a sec. I wanted to look back also on the rugby stuff. I think that it's really funny that they managed to make like a quote unquote action scene still hilarious. My friend and I, when we were watching the big rugby game in episode, I think that was episode 4. Yeah. We were like, oh man, all the guys on the other team look like they're 30. And then immediately it cuts to Nick and he's like, how old are the guys on the other team? Because I think they got 30-year-old actors to be like on the rugby team.
Yeah, some of them look pretty old.
They were like older men. Yes, it was like hilarious. And yeah, just like all that stuff. The two big like I just enjoy the rugby in general because it's a sport that's at the center, and like sports are in Nick's life a big part of Nick's life. So it's cool that they focused in on them. But the two original characters to the show are Isaac, who we mentioned, who's like not really a character. I mean, he's very supportive. He knows everybody's gay before they say it. He's like there and present and friendly enough He doesn't have a plot though. And then there's Imogen, who is completely original to the show.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this is where I started to be like, oh, why did this is a conflict that we literally added?
Yeah, that's conflict for conflict's sake. That's strange.
It also solves itself. Like
right.
it effortlessly solves itself because Imogen is a girl who like very clearly has a crush on Nick, and all of his other friends, including Harry, are like, you should probably get with her. She clearly likes you, and he feels pressured by that. And then the most delicious cringe I've ever felt in recent memory was when she was like, by the way, my dog died. Anyways, what did you want to tell me? You wanted to break? You don't like me? Or like he's like about to tell her he doesn't like her, but she tells him that her dog died. And he just feels that tension of like, oh, shit, I can't say it anymore. And you worry that he's going to like start dating her because he feels so uncomfortable saying it. But then it just works out. It just like cleans itself up. And it's like you straight up didn't need this character in the series.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like not really a needed conflict because then it's totally gone. But I think to play Imogen's advocate for a second here, I think what it can do if we choose to see value in this is it distinguishes Nick's actions from Ben's actions, right? Because Ben like has a girl that he's making out with and not telling Charlie about, and Nick is like, okay, I'm gonna like do the right thing and be honest with people and make sure that everybody is in the know and approach this, as a good guy. And I think the other thing that Imogen's presence can accomplish is it's just another example of showing the viewers of the show, like, it can be fine. Like, you can be honest with someone and say, I don't like you like that. And then life is okay. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of nice. So not a necessity, but also not, Imogen doesn't detract from the show. And I think she can fit in with some of the larger themes.
She can play with the rest of it. She is funny.
Yeah. I think the actress does a good job. But you could have made it like a 7-episode show and accomplished a lot of the same stuff without this plot line, probably.
I think that Nick, to your point, fills the gaps that what's the ex's name again? I keep forgetting his name.
Ben.
He feels what are the biggest issues with Ben? First of all, he kisses without consent, which is gross.
Yes.
And horrible. He's a terrible listener, and he
wants to keep Charlie a secret in a secret, like, mean way,
and embarrass him in public when he tries to make it public.
Yes,
because he's so. And as Charlie says later, it's because he's so afraid of his own homosexuality. He's terrified of it, and so he can't possibly let people know about it. Whereas Nick is like big on consent, is a great listener, is deeply concerned with Charlie's mental state, and so he's like everything that Ben is not, which I think is the essential parallel there. So like, yeah, I guess in the sense that Imogen is underlining that more, she does belong here. But yeah, I really just enjoyed all this stuff. How did you feel about this episode 6 milkshake pop up? This was a little strange, right? They're like all hanging out at a milk. It's like they just had an extra set, or they had some extra set budget.
Oddly beautiful milkshakes.
Yeah.
For this, whatever this was.
This is where me and my group chat all go and tell each other that we're all dating and we all love each other, except Tao, who becomes a sort of tertiary protagonist in this. I don't have a tertagonist, maybe. I don't have that term.
Yeah,
that
something
word.
like that.
Tao is a troubling character in some ways, but also a relatable character because he understands that Charlie feels a lot of strong things about Nick. He worries at first that Nick is straight. He's really oblivious to the fact that everyone else knows before he does that they're dating and that they like each other. And so because of that obliviousness, he thinks this friendship is going to fall apart. I need to keep them apart, and becomes a sort of like villain in a way too, because he's so deeply afraid of I already in a way lost Elle from our immediate friend group. How do I keep this group together? I get it. we've all like deep down been Tao in some way and been like, yeah, other people are happy, but like this is getting in the way of what made me happy. And I don't feel like this is going to work out. And and it's also like it's coming from a place of concern for Charlie. It's like your best friend has been hurt so many times. You don't even want him to engage with this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like it's a mix of motivations. There's a selfishness to it. There's a protectiveness that is condescending in its way. There's sort of worry about like, am I going to be alone? I think it's a pretty complex characterization, which is cool to see. And yeah, like Tao makes a series of choices where it's like, bud, we can just talk to each other. You don't have to do that way. But it's teens, right? It feels true to life.
Exactly. I've done better and worse in my own life. I think that actor plays it really well, and I like.
And the hairstylist is doing a great job too.
That swoopy hairstyle is bananas. That's not even in the comic. I thought that was them like adapting his hair, but his hair's normal in the comic. Where's the hat? Why? I love it though.
I love the hair.
It reminds me a lot. This show actually has a lot of similarities to Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the movie.
I thought about that movie earlier.
Yeah. Like with the sister, the like sister who knows everything and the main character who's like really anxious. Like there are parallels. It's sort of a gay Scott Pilgrim versus the World without the fighting, I guess.
Yes.
But then, the last thing with these episodes is just the music stuff in episode 6, which we get to see like everybody getting ready for a concert. We get some more of the girls, of the lesbians being friends and worrying about each other and being supportive for each other. It's a good like side character spotlight episode. Yeah. And then the absurd milkshake pop-up is hilarious. Yeah. Also, when they go on group dates, what does Isaac do?
Yeah, where was Isaac?
He's there. He comes with them, I think. But like...
To the milkshake thing?
I'm going to double check.
I don't think Isaac was there.
Then that feels bad too. It's just like we don't invite Isaac to this.
I don't know.
I mean, I guess it's a date.
Yeah.
But I did think of like if you're gonna he's not there. You're right. If you're gonna introduce Isaac, then like I don't know, maybe they're gonna make him a character in the second one. We saw later. We can talk about the book that he reads in episode 8. But I have theories. I have Isaac-based theories.
Okay, good.
You want to zoom out one more time and talk about the full series, including 7 and 8?
Yeah, I think so. Let's do that.
Okay.
Well, what's your should you watch recommendation by this point at the end of 6? Do you still feel the same way about the show?
So yes. At this point, you may be saying, again, the conflict seems to be gone. Everything just worked out. They just had a nice band recital. The show's almost over. How are they going to possibly introduce stuff? I got to warn you. And they've
basically resolved the Tara Darcy conflict almost too quickly, I would say.
And so you may be thinking, what conflict is even left? And so to that, I would just say, watch one more episode. If you're like, where's the stress coming from?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think you'd if you're watching now, you're bought in. It's an ensemble show. It's a show where all the characters are funny and interesting, and they do funny, interesting things to nice indie music. That's like what 2 to 6 basically is. There's conflict on the way there. What about you?
Yeah, I think this is the part of the show that I enjoyed the most. This stretch where the hurdles that we need to jump over are not life or death, but you can understand how a character in this position would feel like this is the most important thing in my life right now. Like, oh my God, I have this date with Imogen, and I got to go to Charlie's birthday and make sure I get him a gift, and I just don't know how to talk about my feelings. Like, that's the stuff that I think this show does the very best. And then I think there's enough of that in the last 2 episodes to make me say, like, if you like that and you want that, you should watch the show. But it does kind of try to do some like TV stuff in episodes 7 and 8, which we can talk about now.
Yeah. So episode 7 is called Bully, which is explaining what's going on with this one. You may be wondering.
Yeah, the titles are pretty straightforward. Just gonna say
they're all titles of chapters.
Yeah,
secret, friend, girls, kiss, crush. Yeah. So bully is when bullying starts to happen. If you're wondering, hey, there's a lot of straight people who know that these kids are queer. Why is there no like homophobia? Well, guys, episode 7 contains a big, fat, heaping helping of 20 straight minutes of intense homophobia in like different systemic ways. I think there are moments in the series where the homophobia is like really hammy. It's like, oh, you're gay. Like, that's weird. Like that kind of homophobia.
Yeah. What is it like to be gay? And it's like, what?
Yeah. I put my arm around you and ask you what, like, do you like my friend? He's a guy. You like guys, right? Like, I have heard people talk like this in real life. It's rare enough, even in high school, especially these days, to talk like that.
Yeah.
That just isn't realistic homophobia. What is realistic is the persistence that Harry has towards bullying these two guys, and making them not only feel isolated, but feel like bad for existing. And it just gets so targeted that like this episode honestly like made me feel gross and unhappy, and I was like, I don't even like, is Heartstopper just like like this just becomes a lot of suffering out of nowhere, which was really tough for me to watch.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Of course.
Do you think that is like, is that a useful thing to introduce into the show to address, or do you feel like it was handled poorly, or like a kind of rough sketch of those things? Like, is it just that it feels uncomfortable because those things are uncomfortable, or is the show also mishandling its portrayal of homophobia in that way?
This is the key question of the Heartstopper, the comic versus the show, because none of this is as serious in the comic at all. Watching the show, it gets a lot more intense. In real life, this gets a lot more intense. So it begs the question, do I want young queer kids to believe that love is whatever you want it to be and it can work out and it's beautiful? Or do I want them to see like fairly accurate depictions of what it is in real life? It's basically, are you saying, do you want like a form, like a fantastical reality or a real reality? And I think you need both. I think young people need to see both. There's value in the like beautiful, sweet episodes 2 to 6 and the comic style of like, we're worried, but it's probably fine. Everything's gonna work out in the end. But like 7 not only introduces like real life accurate homophobia, but also like the toll that it takes on your mental health in the long term in ways that are really subtle. But these are what made me the most uncomfortable. So something I learned, I'm gonna just talk about a little bit like mild spoilers for later in the comic. Charlie develops an eating disorder as a result of partly as a result of the events of this episode. Because he's worried about what people think about him. He's worried about the way he looks. He spends the beginning of the episode staring in the mirror. We start getting a sense the way he talks about food and stuff that he's like changing his relationship with food. So he does goes on to become a major plot line. That's the sort of thing where I'm like, if you watch Heartstopper the show and you're like, I should read the comic, but you're like a lot of people I know very sensitive to stories about eating disorders, especially in young teens, you might just need to stop, because that's too real. You know, that's and it begs the question of like, how much do I want to see this? Is it worth it to watch a kid suffer? Is it worth it to watch Tao like get his ass beat by Harry because he doesn't know how to be what his friend wants anymore? And I don't have a firm answer for that. That's my biggest struggle with the series. Yeah,
it's a challenging question that I obviously don't have perspective to answer. I just have more questions about it. Because I wonder, I would imagine the logic of doing this stuff with Harry at the movie theater in episode 7 and having him drop the F-bomb, which I would imagine is not in the comic, right?
I don't think so.
Like I would imagine including all of that stuff is meant to create the kind of like darkest before the dawn moment to make the like triumph over that or the survival through that sweeter and like a more triumphant moment. And I think that's an assumption that's worth challenging. Like, do we need to, like you're saying, watch characters suffer in order to like watch them be happy afterwards. Because like, can't we just be
Just
happy?
have it. Exactly.
I don't know. And I think different people would have different answers to that at different degrees. But it's definitely something that you're in for if you're watching this much of the show.
And like it all works out, you know,
and it all works out extremely well. Like Harry gets suspended, and you know, Nick tells his mom, and she's incredible about it. And I cried at that scene. It was so beautiful.
Are you kidding? It's so good. Sorry, can we just touch on that? Because coming out scenes never work like this. You either they depict it and it doesn't work, and it's really sad. Or they don't depict it and they're like, it worked, whatever. We never get to specifically see how it, quote unquote, works in the sense that the parent is accepting. And I love that the fact that he's like, Mom, I think I'm bisexual. Do you know what that word means? And she says, like, I wasn't born, yesterday. I know that word. That word has existed. And like, that's a truth, is like parents today, young people's parents, know what the words mean. Whether or not they accept you is a question, and I am there with Nick in like his fear of coming out to his parents, but like it can work. And that's I think about the I think about bell hooks a lot when I talk about the show, because she had famously said, to be loving is to be open to grief, to be touched by sorrow, even sorrow that is unending, which is one of her big quotes. And like the whole practice of radical love, because like showing these things going well is radical in its own way. It is, it is in itself a pushback against the notion that queer love stories have to feature suffering. And so in that way, I'm disappointed in episode 7 for having so much suffering, is because like you didn't have to. You actually could have done this without it.
And for having that physical violence that you rightfully said earlier episodes avoided in a way that was nice. And then now all of a sudden it's like, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. Because it's episode 7 of an 8-episode miniseries. Exactly.
And so that's why I'm like, I come out at the end of this saying like, I don't know if I needed it, but at the same, like, because the counter argument to like, oh, kids need to see that being out and a gay doesn't always work out, is like, just look around. Like, this is rare. This working well is super rare. We already have enough examples of how being out is like dangerous and scary in our real world, in our legislation, in 90% of queer media. So like, it's actually more interesting and more unique to show that like it can just work. I'm sure you had and have students in your high school who are queer who are not experiencing daily, assaults and fights like this.
Right.
They can just live because the world is different now.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a teacher, I've definitely had conversations, this past year, a lot of conversations around gender identity and students having attitudes towards that at this point, honestly, like from my experience as a high school teacher, I only really, teach like my small high school of students, and we're in New York City and whatever. So don't know how representative it is of all students, but at this point, like young people know the terminology, they know these things. They also know socially that it's like not acceptable to be a huge like fucking asshole about it. And that means some kids are gonna, like, I thought Harry was gonna sort of do the thing of like, oh, you're so sensitive, like, and he kind of says like, nobody can take a joke, but he doesn't really say it in the way that people say it nowadays. It feels like the portrayal of Harry's homophobia is in a way the most outdated part of the show, because homophobia just like looks different now for kids who are on social media, to the extent that kids these days are, and aware of these things. Like, Harry isn't going to put his arm around someone and be like, what is it like to be gay? Like, he knows what it's like to be gay because he's on the internet,
Yeah.
So his version of homophobia is going to look a little more self-aware, more like kind of subtle, and then like, oh, well, I didn't say anything technically wrong, but I'm being a terrible person. And then a lot of it, for my students, it's people who are just kind of like dismissive of
things like
especially
pronouns
gender
and
stuff
identity.
and pronouns, right? Because they're worried about looking ignorant.
Mhm.
And so for some people, their response is to say like, well, fuck it, I'm just not going to try, because I don't want to have the experience of not knowing something and having to learn something and be vulnerable in the fact that I'm like in the process of learning something.
Yeah.
But I've also had like really great experiences with those same students where they're like, okay, like, yeah, I'll hear this out and I have questions about this and I'm going to like risk vulnerability for a short period of time. So I don't know, that to me, just as a teacher, felt the show is so good at the like, well, what we were talking about before of the positivity in these relationships, like the healthiness of these queer relationships. It's so great at showing how queer community forms and queer self-identity forms in relation to the internet. And it's so bad at like, this freaking homophobic boy said this terrible thing that feels like a bully out of an 80s movie or something.
Bingo.
I don't know. Yeah. So
I'm
that's
getting
where
like
episode 7 falters for me.
Totally. I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it. And because this is like my ultimate thesis with Heartstopper is those who say, even having watched the pilot, like, oh, this isn't realistic. This isn't the way that being gay feels like in real life. Like, imagine a better world, guys. Like let's actually try to imagine what it doesn't have to be realistic. This can be aspirational for young teenagers that like, I like the boy on the rugby team and oh my God, he actually likes me back. I want kids to be able to dream about being able to come out to their parents and it working out.
Yeah.
The realism isn't the only way to portray I'm like going to start crying here. It's not the only way to portray this type of story. There is value in a fantastical, beautiful, clean romance that just works. And by episode 8, you feel like you are baptized in that beach that the boys go to because you're free. The happiness is, I keep saying it, it's euphoric. It just feels so joyous. And like I'm so glad episode 8 ends the series because the happiness between Nick and Charlie, this is where I started crying a lot, was just like the fact that they got through so much.
Pure. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. I mean, like everybody, it's like everybody's been blessed by a positivity fairy in this one, like Tao and Nick get to talk to each other and be like, hey, I kind of pushed you away from who's now your boyfriend. I'm really sorry about that. And I want us to be in a bigger friend group. And then like all the women of the show start being friends with each other and like talking to each other more. We get the quote unquote conflict of episode 8 is the sports day, which is the British equivalent of like a field day. We had field days, right?
Yeah, we did.
You're wearing pennies and you're playing sports, and it's like, oh, which one? I'm a better runner. We learned in the first episode that Charlie's a good runner, and so he takes over for Tao because he's worried about like seeing Nick at playing rugby there. And so it's just like everything works, and people play sports, and Stephen Fry is the announcer. Did you catch that? Stephen Fry is the
No, I did not.
I was like, why do I recognize this British man? I'm like, oh my God, that's Stephen Fry as their school announcer.
That's fine.
And they go privately to a hallway and they share another kiss. And it's like the most beautiful thing in the world because it's just can you stop questioning this and accept it?
Yeah.
And then we have the beach trip. Also fun cameo when they're on the train going to the beach. The red-haired woman that's on the train with them is Alice Oseman. She's drawing and she has a rainbow-colored purse. And I was like, bro, that's awesome. She kind of like takes her babies a little bit to the beach and lets them have this like wonderful moment. The line that because Charlie's like, can you you really mean it? This isn't a Ben thing. Can you actually tell me you like me? Do you like me or do you like me like me? And Nick says, I like you so much and I like liking you. And
I love liking you.
I love liking you. And I was like, ah. Speaking of noises I made during the show. Besides over and over again going, aw, and cute. At this point, I was like weepy.
Just drenched in tears.
Yes. That's absolutely true. And again, showing the talk and having the talk go well is like, this type of positivity is radical in today's world. I need some positivity in my life. I don't need that much suffering. I don't hate episode 7. I just don't think you need it. Or maybe there's different considerations to be had when you're making a show, but because maybe that was a Netflix thing. Maybe Netflix was like, you can't just have them go like, Harry, you're homophobic, bye, like he does in the comic. We actually have to have him like be mean. So I don't know. And now that they're together, the show can be about, okay, what does being in a gay relationship in high school actually look like, with like like one that starts in a healthy place. It can be about Isaac reading Gender Explorers and discovering that they're non-binary.
That's probably what's gonna happen. Yeah,
I think so. That's the only representation really of that I know of that they haven't touched at all, like the big tentpole ones.
Yeah,
but it's a sweet show. I would say it's heartwarming as hell, and it's very. I hope this inspires some young people to start thinking about themselves a bit.
Me too.
Should you watch Heartstopper?
Yeah, I think so. I mean it. I think the value of the show that we're outlining as like presenting this particular world where like things can work out is a value that you can get from the first few episodes. And then if the question is like, should you finish Heartstopper? I mean, do you want to see these characters be happy?
Yeah.
Keep watching. Like, you don't want to see them go to the beach? What?
They have a great beach trip. What's wrong with you? Why did you go this far?
They have milkshakes. They have milkshakes in episode 6. Why don't you want to see that?
Yeah, come on. Isaac,
you don't want to see them hold hands at the movies? Huh?
The ominousness, by the way, of Ben in the background. And I was like, is he going to see them? And then he's like, I saw you assholes. And I was like, no. You fiend.
Yeah.
But yeah, you get to watch these things go well. And ultimately, my recommendation is, there's enough cynical, depressing media out there about plagues and time travel and murder and systemic abuse. Sometimes you just got to watch some freaking boys fall in love to some indie music, and it's fine, and it's good.
Yeah. Yes.
Sometimes that's enough. Love is enough. So, a huge thumbs up from us at Chats for Heartstopper on Netflix.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't seem up your alley, I'd say give it a shot. You'll feel good. It's good serotonin. You need it. It does a body good. So that's what we have. Did you have any other like little things you wanted to shout out? I wanted to shout out the teacher, by the way. I
had a gripe with.
Ooh.
Oh, you're talking about the art teacher?
Yeah, I'm talking about the gay art teacher.
The art teacher's awesome.
That's the teacher every teacher should be, something like that.
Yeah. I loved all the interactions that he had with the art teacher. And that room, the art room, like the set design folks did a fantastic job.
When you
and
sit
that
in
shot
the corner,
they keep returning to with the corner, yeah.
Yeah, there's like flowers on the floor
set.
around you. It's awesome.
Yeah. And
you had a bone with the teacher.
His form teacher being like such a jerk. I was annoyed by that because there's this like moment in the first episode where he's like, let's see where I put you. Whatever. You'll have a fine year or you won't. You won't talk. And like that wasn't in the comic because I read the first one. He is just a guy who's like sit over there, and they were like, we're gonna make this guy a dick. Come on, Heartstopper. Why are you doing that?
He's like
just
British
the
comedy
form teacher.
Yeah. But it's unnecessary. I agree.
That was a little annoying, but anyway, one of those adaptation things.
Exactly. Some of the stuff I did really enjoy the graphical touches by the end when they first like their hands go near each other and the sparks fly. It's corny, but I am here for it. For the little like
yes.
I really, really want to shout at episode 3 for just lighting and music alone. I want that episode to like win an Emmy or something. And more Elle. If we get a season 2, I want to see way more Elle. I think that actress is awesome. And I want to just see her do things at the girls' school. Like, what do they got going on over there?
I agree.
So that's Heartstopper. It's a great show. You should watch it.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about what we're watching next month?
For August, we're going to do something that I don't think we've done before on Should You Watch. We're going to watch a show that's in its second season. That's new for us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I recently went to a stand-up show last week where one of the comics was associated with this show that I'd never heard of before, that I'm excited for us to watch. It's a Showtime show about a couple people living in Brooklyn. One of them's an educator. Hijinks ensue, apparently. It's called Flatbush Misdemeanors, and it is in its second season on Showtime right now. So we're going to catch up on the show, and we're going to talk about whether you should do the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's set to, this season started in June, and it's going to end on August 21st. So we'll be able to talk about the entire second season by the time we record.
And then we can catch up, maybe watching it weekly through August.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Flatbush Misdemeanors, it's on Showtime in the U.S. Find it however you can. And if you don't find it, we'll tell you if you should watch it by the end of the month. Groovy. Magellan, I have to ask you, like I always do, where can people find you online?
I'm not on social media, but you can find me on another podcast called Super Smash Echoes. It's a monthly video game podcast that I do with my friend Justin, where we play games in a sort of book club format that are related to the Super Smash Brothers franchise in some way. So Super Smash Echoes, check us out over there. Alan, what about you?
I am co-hosting two other podcasts, one of which is The Hunter's Quorum, formerly known as the Johto Quorum, where my friend Six and I and our friend Casey, a.k.a. Manofsky, talk about the monsters of the Monster Hunter video game franchise. What makes them cool, what makes them funny, what makes them weird, all of that good stuff. We've been playing a lot of Sunbreak together and having a great time. So if you care about Monster Hunter or video games or people joking about video games, then check out The Hunter's Quorum. I'm also the director of content for the American Marketing Association in Boston, which primarily means that I host and produce their podcast, Talking Marketing, which is a bi-monthly show where we interview marketing professionals from around the world and interview them about their craft and what makes their job interesting and what they like about it. So check out Talking Marketing. We have some really cool episodes of that coming out soon. I just recorded one that I was thrilled by, and I think people will get a kick out of it even if you don't care about marketing. That brings us to our plug zone for chats. Magellan, did you want to take this one, please?
Sure. You can get in touch with the show in a couple different ways. You can email us at chatspod@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/chatspod. You can join fellow listeners in discussions about current and former seasons of chats over at reddit.com/r/chatspod. And you can also join fellow listeners on our Discord, which is a benefit for our patrons, $1 and up. But also, if you don't have the cash or the desire to support us on Patreon, but you want to be on the Discord, let us know, and we'll sneak you in the back door. It'll be okay. Speaking of Patreon, $1 a month and up gets you access to assorted bonus content in the Discord. $3 and up gets you access to twice monthly bonus content, one of which will be an episode selected by us, one of which will be an episode selected by chance. We'll put a theme out there, put some thoughts on a wheel, spin the wheel. There's a wheel spin video. It's a real production over there on the Chat's Patreon. And then $5 a month gets you thanked at the end of the show. Alan, do you have that list? Could you do that?
Thank you to our $5 chatsums, who are as follows: Arthur, Chloe, Jen, Kat, Lee, Magellan's mom, Marcus, Marin, Michael, Nick and Pat of the Brothers at Infinite War, Fendon, Six, and Stefan. Thank you for supporting Chats Television Podcast.
You can also support the show by rating us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, by sharing the show with folks. And this is Should You Watch. If you're listening on the Should You Watch feed, we have a whole other feed that's a main feed where we talk about shows on a weekly basis and not just a monthly basis. And then we have a website, chatspod.com. We have someone who helped design our podcast art at Camillustrator on the socials. And that's our deal. Thank you for listening, folks. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. This is a joy for us to do, to watch TV, to talk about TV, and to hang out with all of you and with each other. Thank you. And we'll catch you next month with Flatbush Misdemeanors. Bye, Alan.
Bye, Magellan. Bye, everyone.
Bye.